The United Arab Emirates is set to officially enter the Iran conflict, helping the U.S. military strike Iran. This could be the most shocking news in recent days, and marks another key turning point in the Middle East conflict. Reports suggest that Iran's billions of dollars in the UAE will also be frozen, which ties into China's significant interests. Observers have pointed out that Beijing is currently in a state of turmoil, with the Chinese government caught in a difficult position, unsure how to respond. The Wall Street Journal reported on March 31st that the UAE is lobbying the United Nations Security Council to pass a resolution proposed by Bahrain. This would authorize countries to use all necessary means to defend commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz and surrounding areas. All necessary means clearly refers to the use of force. Voting on the resolution is expected soon, and reports suggest that even if it faces vetoes from China and Russia, or an alternative version from France, the UAE is still prepared to assist the US and its allies, making the UAE the first Gulf country to officially enter the war. According to UAE officials, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries are also shifting their stance against the Iranian regime, hoping the war will continue until Tehran is incapacitated or overthrown. But they have not yet committed to sending troops. The UAE believes that if the UN Security Council grants authorization, countries in Eurasia that have been on the sidelines will be more willing to help clear the strait. This official confirmed that the UAE is actively reviewing its military role in ensuring the security of the Strait of Hormuz, including assisting with clearing mines and providing other support. Additionally, some Arab officials have said that the UAE is advocating for the U.S. to occupy Abu Musa Island in the Strait of Hormuz, which is under Iranian control but claimed by the UAE. Since the U.S.-Israeli coalition began attacking Iran has indiscriminately bombarded Middle Eastern countries, including the UAE. According to official data, Iran launched over 2,500 missiles and drones at the UAE, more than the combined attacks on Israel and other Gulf nations. They resulted in at least 10 deaths and 171 injuries in the UAE. UAE officials have also adopted more direct and severe language recently. UAE Foreign Minister Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan described Iran as a terrorist state, while President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan referred to Iran as the enemy. Experts say that compared to the early stages of the war, when Beijing was more concerned about the overthrow of the Iranian regime, China is now more worried about its economy being severely impacted. With the UAE's involvement in the war, the situation is becoming more unfavorable for Beijing. AFP reported that the effects of the Middle East war have already reached China, particularly with rising gasoline and plastic prices. While Beijing condemned the killing of Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei, it also criticized Tehran's attacks on the Persian Gulf region. Mainstream Western media believe that although China and Iran are sometimes seen as part of an anti-Western group, along with Russia and North Korea, their relationship is more about mutual benefits. Oil exports are a key revenue source for Tehran, and under harsh sanctions, Iran relies on China to buy oil to fill its coffers. According to data from shipping analytics firm Kepler, over 80% of Iran's oil exports last year went to China, but this only accounts for 13% of China's seaborne oil imports. William Figueroa, an expert on China and Iran affairs at the University of Groningen, stated, "China is interested in Iran primarily as a source of discounted oil, and while Iran does supply oil to China, China is far from dependent on Tehran." Iran's oil-rich neighbors in the Persian Gulf are generally seen as offering everything Iran has in a much more stable, U.S.-friendly environment. Last year, trade between China and Iran was worth about $9.96 billion US, compared with roughly $108 billion with Saudi Arabia and the UAE each, and about $51 billion with Iraq. He believes that the asymmetry in the economic needs between Iran and China is the fundamental reason why Beijing has not directly intervened militarily in the Middle East conflict. However, the Chinese government has previously supplied drones and dual-use chemicals to Iran, and it is highly likely that intelligence has also been shared. U.S. officials have also accused the Chinese state-owned semiconductor manufacturer SMIC of selling chip manufacturing equipment to the Iranian military. Andrea Giselli, an international political scholar at the University of Exeter, told AFP that China wants the war to end quickly on its own, and that it would be even better from Beijing's perspective if the United States were to retreat from the conflict. But she warned that we should not overestimate China's ability or willingness to push the situation in that direction. Back in 2023, China successfully mediated the resumption of diplomatic relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. This seemingly increased its influence in the Middle East, but this month, Beijing still failed to prevent Tehran from deploying large numbers of drones to attack Saudi oil infrastructure. Gisele candidly stated that while China might be pleased to see U.S. forces bogged down in this war, the conflict still brings significant risks. Rising oil prices and potential damage to the regional economy could threaten China's development. Beijing ultimately finds itself in an awkward diplomatic situation, criticizing the infringement of sovereignty by Gulf countries, but not directly condemning Iran. Analyst Mr. Z says that Beijing's current diplomatic position is indeed awkward. However, he points out that they have clearly overlooked or avoided the most crucial part, that Iran's role for Beijing goes far beyond just providing cheap oil, and the mutual dependence between the two countries is much more complex than it appears. Instagram user Zibing007 revealed, the Chinese Communist Party is not just Iran's biggest oil buyer. It is effectively propping up the entire regime. In 2025, China bought nearly 90% of Iran's exported oil, worth $31.2 billion. Furthermore, Beijing has set up a shadow banking system through Kunlun Bank, which helps Iran bypass the international financial network and facilitates the flow of funds. Kunlun Bank is essentially the shadow treasury of the Iranian regime. It directly handles the massive funds from China's purchase of Iranian oil, which accounts for about 45% of Iran's government budget. So, where does all this money go? Apart from maintaining Tehran's operations, the rest is funneled to proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. This is no longer just trade. It's the Chinese government directly funding military activities that threaten Middle Eastern stability and American interests. In fact, it has always been Beijing supporting Iran from behind the scenes, while Iran is the one igniting the conflict on the front lines. Iran's contribution to Beijing goes far beyond cheap oil. Iran is a strategic foothold for China in the Middle East and an essential tool for Beijing to counter its primary enemy, the United States. This influence and role are difficult to quantify merely with financial figures. However, after the war broke out, the situation has been moving in the direction Beijing most fears. Tehran is now openly clashing with Beijing. Here's how it all unfolded. In early March, a missile fragment hit the exterior of the Burj Al Arab Hotel in Dubai. The slight damage to this 7-star landmark caused ripples in global financial media far beyond its physical impact. Soon, various narratives began to spread wildly. Dubai was becoming a ghost town. Wealthy individuals were fleeing. Private jets were fully booked, and the beaches on Palm Island were empty. So, why did Iran target Dubai? From a military perspective, the UAE hosts U.S. military and intelligence bases, so attacking a U.S.-Israeli intelligence partner seems logical. But from a financial perspective, Dubai is where Iran's elite store their most important overseas assets, and is a key gray channel for bypassing international sanctions. Dubai has never just been a playground for the Western world and Gulf elites. It's also one of Iran's most crucial economic lifelines under sanctions. To put it more plainly, Dubai is the artery connecting Tehran and Beijing. While Iran's missiles hit the UAE's airports and financial infrastructure, they were essentially severing the link to Beijing. According to a report from the Atlantic Council, Dubai's free zone has long been home to numerous Iran-linked shell companies, used to conceal the true sources of Iranian oil and commodities, allowing them to circulate in the international market while bypassing Western sanctions. At the same time, Dubai hosts a large informal money exchange network, the Hawala system. This functions outside the traditional banking system to transfer Iranian funds across borders. The Iranian elite's interests in Dubai go far beyond this. Business networks tied to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, private assets of political elites, and the savings of wealthy middle-class families, all forms of Iranian wealth, are entrenched in Dubai's real estate, trade enterprises, and financial accounts. For many of Iran's rich, Dubai is not a hostile country, but a second home for their wealth. Against this backdrop, Iran's decision to launch 2/3 of its retaliatory weapons at the UAE becomes particularly intriguing. Iran's constant bombings of the UAE are, in simple terms, like bombing its own wallet. Why would this happen? Mr. Z stated that the UAE's decision to enter the conflict was actually foreshadowed. It was the UAE that made the first move. Shortly after the assassination of Khamenei, news broke that the UAE was considering freezing up to hundreds of billions of dollars in Iranian assets within its borders. Recently, many Iranians living in the UAE reported that their work, partner, and long-term investment visas were abruptly revoked. According to a report by Today Zaman, this purge targets thousands of Iranians, including those who had purchased property and obtained long-term residency through the 99-year lease plan. Even though these expatriates held legal status tied to their property, their residency was forcibly terminated, and now they are banned from re-entering, with no resolution timeline. Strangely, non-Iranian family members in some households were still allowed entry, indicating that the action was highly targeted by nationality. The scope of the crackdown extends beyond individuals to institutions. Iranian-affiliated schools, hospitals, cultural associations, and mosques have also been ordered to shut down. At least 5 Iranian schools were forced to close, and student records have been returned to parents. Relevant staff members lost their residency due to the shutdown of these institutions. UAE authorities have remained silent on the matter, offering no legal basis for the actions. Considering that there are 500 to 800,000 Iranian expatriates in the UAE, with investments totaling up to 530 billion US dollars in the real estate market, this rare action sends an extremely clear and dangerous pre-war signal to the outside world. If this policy is fully implemented, it will severely limit Iran's access to foreign exchange and its participation in global trade, which would be a fatal blow to Iran's economy, already reeling from both inflation and the impact of war. According to informed officials, the UAE authorities are assessing a series of measures aimed at completely dismantling Iran's illegal operations network in the region. On the financial front, the UAE is considering freezing the assets of shadow companies used to conceal trade dealings and cracking down on underground money exchanges and currency transfer networks. These institutions have long been used to bypass the regular banking system for cross-border fund transfers. If the UAE decides to act, the primary targets will be accounts linked to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Data from the U.S. Department of Treasury in June last year indicated that Iran is increasingly allocating crude oil to defense and security agencies like the IRGC, which sell it on the international market for cash. This suggests that the UAE no longer wants to play the role of intermediary between Beijing and Tehran. Naturally, the Iranian rulers are not happy with this blow. Beyond retaliating against the UAE, they believe that to reverse the situation, they must drag Beijing into the conflict. They know that while the UAE is important to Iran, the UAE is equally important to China. Due to its unique nature, Quinlan Bank has always been closely monitored by the U.S. government. As a result, it does not have physical branches overseas, only service points in Hong Kong and Singapore. After being sanctioned by the U.S. in July 2012, many of Quinlan Bank's transactions were redirected to Chinese banks in the UAE. Tehran's bombing of Dubai is essentially a threat to Beijing. If China does not help to intervene, Iran will destroy the transaction platform between the two countries. At the same time, it targets Beijing's energy supply and influence in the UAE, ultimately pushing the region closer to the U.S. What Iran didn't expect was that Beijing didn't respond to its pressure, and the most severe consequence came. Not only did Beijing refuse to intervene, but the UAE decided to join the war. Facing this difficult situation, Tehran is now cornered. Reports indicate that Iran has recently escalated its offensive against the UAE, directly warning that if the country supports U.S.-Israeli actions, it will destroy civilian infrastructure in the UAE. According to a researcher from the UK's Royal Institute of International Affairs and former Pentagon Middle East advisor, Bilal Y. Saab, the UAE's decision to join military actions will send a clear message of support from Arab countries for striking Iran. It will also provide more options for military operations against Iran and attempts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. With its military bases, Jebel Ali Deepwater Port, and its geographical location near the entrance of the Strait of Hormuz, the UAE could become an important forward base for U.S.-led operations. The UAE Air Force, equipped with U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets, reconnaissance drones, bombers, and short-range missiles, can also support escort missions and collaborate in striking Iranian targets. At this point, the hardest part is not the Iranian government. Aside from the Revolutionary Guard officials whose assets were frozen by the UAE and are likely to be liquidated, the Iranian people have an easy choice: dismantle the Mullah regime and return to the free world. The real worry now lies with China, which is being torn apart by this Middle East conflict. China's westward strategy has come to an end. Its energy security in the Arab world is in jeopardy, and its interests have been severely impacted. At the same time, Beijing must face a terrifying dual reality: a Washington no longer tied down by the Middle East, able to focus its military power on the Indo-Pacific, and China's global influence in the global south is rapidly losing momentum.